Welcome to Amici, news and insight from the New York courts. I'm John Carr. Shortly after Peter F. Lane took office as a New York City civil court judge in January, he was surprised to get a call from the Estonian Embassy. He assumed it was a wrong number. Regardless, he picked it up and learned that he is apparently the first and only judge in the nation of Estonian descent. In this program, we'll explore Judge Lane's background and learn a little about a country in Northern Europe that I suspect some of us may have heard of, but most of us could never pinpoint on a map. Judge, thank you for coming on the program. So, where in the world is Estonia?
Estonia, and thanks for having me, John. Tere, as they'd say, hello in Estonian. So it's the Republic of Estonia. It's in northeastern Europe. The capital city's Tallinn, and it's across the Baltic. It's hard for people to picture this, so I'll just paint it a little bit. It's across from the Baltic Sea from Helsinki. Finland is north. There's about 2,300 plus islands scattered around the Baltic Sea that make up Estonia, as well as its mainland. It's kind of in the middle of the Baltic Sea, right on the north, and it's surrounded to the south by Latvia and Lithuania below it. To the east is Russia, and St. Petersburg is closest. To the north is Finland, and if you go across the Baltic Sea, kind of northwest is Sweden, coming down Denmark, Germany, and Poland, kind of in the southwest. So it's there. There's 1.3 million people, and only 70% of them are ethnic Estonians. There's a lot of Russians who had been moved in, due to history there. But the Estonians themselves, they're descendants of, it's a Stone Age culture from like 10,000 years ago, and they were native peoples, kind of outside of the Western world in the first century. Tacitus, the Roman philosopher, wrote about them, or historian, and they kind of were. They knew that these people lived in the forests up there and on the islands, but so that's where it is, and it's known now. But sometimes I wonder if maybe Tacitus knew a little more because everybody asks me, "What is Estonia?"
What is it known for?
Well, I mean, I could put it on the two sides, the things that are more positive and some of the historical things. So, it is a parliamentary republic and a constitutional-based democracy and based on, law and dignity. It's the world's first digital society pioneers. They have an e-residency program. So you can live anywhere in the world. If you open a business and a bank account legally and adhere to its business practice, you can become a citizen that way. They have ID cards that they're given. They're encrypted. You can do everything. I have one somewhere here. You can vote. You can buy your groceries. You can take a bus. You can pay your taxes that way. You can log on. It's all on the ID cards. So they're very high UN measures of liberty and freedom. They're always in the top of the list. They have surprising. There's about 220 somewhat ethnic groups living there. They have two World Heritage sites. One is in the capital city of Tallinn, which is on the Baltic. The other, well, there is an island called Kino. It's the island of women, where they really, it's one of, they called it the last maternal society in Europe. It's a UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity site. These people and their traditions go back a long way. Basically, the men go out to sea and fish, and the women run everything over there. The children, the teenagers, always rank number one in math and science in the European sector now. So they have some other things too. They always have some interesting entries in the Eurovision, things like that. It's so some of those. But on the other side of history, it's their resilience through history. So this is the other thing, is since about the 1200s, since they were first known about, they've been consistently conquered or militarily subjugated by foreign rulers. So the people have been under the rule of the Crusaders, the Teutonic Order, the Danish Crown, Sweden, the Lithuanian Duchy of Livonia, Poland, Germany, Denmark, Russian Empire, you name it. And it was only until 1918, famous part of history, where they were able to, repel a Russian communist invasion and have independence, which only lasted for 22 years. And this is entering one of the darkest periods of history, where in 1940, the Soviet Red Army came in again, and took them over, and they were then pushed out in 1941 by Nazi Germany, only to be reoccupied in 1944 all the way to 1991 by the Soviet Union. So, and the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, but getting to the positive part of this, they had what's called the singing revolution. You'll get 30,000 Estonians singing, holding hands across the country and the three Baltic states. And basically, they just said, "What can we do with these people?" They withdrew the tanks and they went away, and they peacefully acquired their freedom.
So that sort of unity is probably what keeps it in existence after all that conquering and all that oppression and all that invasions and all that switching hands as to who is in control of it, right?
Yeah, it definitely has an effect on, as you say, the Estonian consciousness there, and they're really on the very edge of. They've always been mercantile, enterprising, free enterprise, democratic people. They haven't been able to express themselves always because of their strategic location up in the Baltic, which was a prized area for so many. Yeah, but they were able. They have their cultural traditions left, but as I say, as a population, think about it. They have less population in the country than they do in Queens, and ethnically, around what they have is probably a small fraction of Queens in the world. I'm talking 700,000 people or something like that. So there they are, but they punch far above their weight. Their contribution to NATO this is things that are never mentioned. They've brought to the world with their digital. They've invented things like Skype. So we're working over Teams now. This technology was started in Estonia.
Now, with 200, I think you said 200 ethnic groups, what is the predominant language?
Predominant language is Estonian, so it's a very interesting language. You can try to Google some of it yourself. It's about 2,000 years old. There were Finno-Ugric peoples and tribes then. It has absolutely no relationship to Latin, Greek, Cyrillic, or any other European language. It doesn't even sound European to your ears. And I've got, as a kid who's thoroughly American and a New Yorker and a Queensite, and from the town of Flushing specifically, to my ears, it sounds something like my Japanese friends, and add in a lot of double and triple vowels, AEs and O's and U's, and a couple of idioms, perhaps in English here and there. So that's their language, and it's been preserved. It's an old language, and it's related mostly to Finnish. But second most in the country, of course, they have a large Russian population that had migrated in over those years in the 20th century. And so they speak Russian. But my grandfather, for instance, who is from there, most of them speak many languages. He spoke 8 languages. And many of them you'll find speak 4 or 5 languages because you have to.
So your connection to Estonia is your grandfather, your maternal grandfather, is it?
That's my maternal grandfather. Yeah, and I've got a lot of immigration on the side, so I'll just map that, and you can focus on the Estonian. Maternal grandfather is from Estonia, is an immigrant. Maternal grandmother is Polish. Of course, that's a whole nother history. Not much is known. Most of them that's been killed off. She had many brothers who were in World War II when she was here. My father's side, his father was an orphan, so he was born in Red Hook, Brooklyn, but sent back to an orphanage in Ireland. Somehow he made it back to the U.S. I don't know. That's a miracle. And then the mother's side were 1850 about. They left, and then 1870 again from the potato famine off of Cobh in the south of Ireland. So the fact of I've always thought, and my wife's from South Africa, by the way. So she's a fresh immigrant, OTB, off the boat, as they say.
Do you know when and why your grandfather came here?
Yeah, so he came of age as a teenager about that 1918 time, and he had some education in University of Tartu in the sciences. And so I'll show you a picture here as you can look. He was also in the Navy Estonian Navy, and he came in 1922 on the SS Paris here, which is through Ellis Island, and he's on the Wall of Honor in Ellis Island, having come through there. And I think he saw an opening as a young man, what was going on, and he had some experience in the Navy and the police forces and such, that this was his opportunity to get to a new world. And it's very interesting. There's a saying by Ernest Hemingway that in every port in the world there's at least two Estonians. Okay. I think that was that kind of generation. So I think he saw that window of opportunity and did that. Yeah. And this country aligned with his ideals of democracy and free enterprise and things like that.
I assume that one of the 8 languages he spoke was English.
It was, yes.
So he came over here knowing the language. But what did he do when he got here? Did he go to school? Did he work? Where did he live? How did he support himself?
It's a good question. So both my grandfathers passed before I died. They're born in the late 1890s. So I'm, to put perspective on my age. I heard he did lots of jobs, but he had some kind of education. Even then, Estonia had good education at 2 universities, and it seemed to be in something in pharmacology. So what his trade here is he made false teeth. He was a dental technician, and he worked with chemicals and mixtures in fashioning and making teeth. And he got a job on Broadway in New York City, and then he lived up in the Bronx, is where my mother was born, until they were going to run the Cross Bronx right through where he lived, and then had to move out of there. But he did that for his life, and he died in his mid-60s, not too much older than I am now. Very simply. And I mean, his dream was to have a family, at least, and have work and have some freedom, and not have to look over his shoulder and think that there was fear, all the way around.
So both of your grandparents were immigrants. How do you think that affected your parents, or your mother, I suppose, in this context, and the way that she raised you?
Well, definitely with my mother, she was affected by this. I mean, so, and this is something that's kind of also, well known if it comes down through, I mean, you may have heard it from people say in Holocaust situations. It's a similar thing, although my grandparents weren't Jewish, but when they've had the entirety of their family in Poland killed, for instance. And so here's a story with my grandfather. So his sister and brother-in-law and their children, they were killed. His father was executed when the Nazis came back in there. Sorry, it's kind of tough for me to talk about that stuff. I could see my mother, this affected her deeply. Here's their Red Cross. I'll show you Red Cross letters trying to get the grandmother out. First sent to the Russian occupation, then to the Nazi occupation, then to the Soviet occupation. They wouldn't let the great-grandmother, her grandmother's the only one who lived. So here's the indignity of it is then you couldn't have private property. So her property was seized in Haapsalu, and she was made a servant to the very soldiers who had killed her family, which is a great indignity. And in some of the last letters that were written to my grandfather, you can see how old these are. She writes how she hadn't been rationed protein for a month and her teeth were falling out. And the next letter, this is what you got from the Soviet Union, if you can look closely. Mother died, a Western Union mammogram, 1955. That's it. And then following that was the repatriation of her land, which my grandfather tried to fight, saying that this person, I won't use his name, who they put in there, was a murderer. And they were demanding return of their land. And I asked the Haapsalu branch, the public courts, to place the property in our names. Any determination would be a miscarriage of justice, and as the word he uses, undemocratic.
Wow.
She died. So that's how he died. So here's he was naturalized as a U.S. citizen, and right attached to that is his draft card. Is he enrolled in the Selective Service?
Was he in the American Army for World War II?
No,
The end of World War II?
no, he was too old. But my mother, I think she was affected. She talked about his father's crying episodes and her mother's as well. And she had to be a bit of a parent to her parents, with the things that they went through. So she became very self-sufficient, and of course, as a mom, was very resilient herself, and persistence and resilience, and very modest and humble too, as a person. It still grabs me.
So you were born in New York City.
Yeah, Greenwich Village.
Your mother was born in the United States.
Hmm.
So you're one and two generations removed from immigrants,
Yeah.
yet you've made clear that she was profoundly impacted by their experience. And I can tell looking at your face and how you got emotional talking about your grandfather that you are as well. And we're talking a ways back. How do you think the immigrant experience that's part of your DNA affected your life, your choice of careers, and your way of looking at the world?
Look, my wife is an immigrant in South Africa, so someday the question may better be posed to my children who are South African, Estonio, Irish, Polish, to New York City kids. I don't know what to call them.
Melting pots.
Right, but it's look, I love growing up in the city. For me, it was great. It affected me because I said, let me take advantage of everything I have here in the city, and I worked as many jobs as I possibly could get my hands on. I did music for a long time. My dad listened to from the 20s. He had jazz on the radio all the time, as he'd say the greats from the 20s and the 30s. He'll have Count Basie and the Dorsey brothers and Jimmy Lunsford and Duke Ellington, and all that. So I grew up listening to that. I played drums from a young age. I was very musical because of my parents. They encouraged that. So I grew up playing jazz. I was in a citywide high school jazz band at 15, sponsored by Con Edison. We played all those songs. You're jumping at the Woodside, April in Paris, Shiny Stockings, Sophisticated Lady. I loved it. I really wanted to be a musician. But another thing I really liked doing was fighting. So I did martial arts, and used to pick up a few bucks in my teenage up to 20 something years old, as $50 here. I was very adept. I did that about for 8 years, three days a week, and sometimes weekends. So the law to me is something of a merger of the adversarialness of the ring together with the theater of the music. As there's a theater to the courtroom, which I love. And I found this out in a strange way, John. I took an internship in my 2L from St. John's, and it was no pay, but I got to work at the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District of New York. And when I got there, I was really scared. And we had about 6 or 7 interns. And I went up there, and the U.S. Attorney then was Otto Obermeyer. And we were in the library. He said, I need a volunteer to work on a very important case, but you're just going to be working with these AUSAs. So it was like, step forward. So it's my instinct. Somebody offered me a paper route. I took a paper route. If they offered me a maintenance job, I took a maintenance job. How hard could this be? Well, it was a big organized trial going on in 1990. And my job was to read the FBI wiretap tap transcripts into evidence to the jury before a federal judge. And I'm I don't know what it's like, 20 years old or something. And I was sweating through my palms until I got up to the podium, and I realized, oh, I'm so familiar with this place. The theater of the courtroom, the adversarialness. There was 6 defendants and 2 prosecutors and 6 attorneys. I said, oh, I love the energy here. And it's also This is democracy at work, our jury system. And I just felt so proud. It's a culmination, excuse me, of things I don't think they could have dreamed of.
Was your legal career as a prosecutor?
No, I wanted to do that at first, and there was a huge recession in 1991 when I got out of law school. They weren't hiring, neither was legal aid. So I took a job on Queens Boulevard. Uh, they said the Boulevard of Broken Dreams. It really wasn't. I was doing landlord-tenant work for a while, and so it got me into the courtroom right away. Day one, I was in the courtroom. And I did that for close to 2 years, and I staved off on my own. And then something hit me. Nobody who I knew in my family had business connections or instinct. Where they came from, they always worked for somebody else. So it was very difficult. And I was lucky enough. I had done some things in the community, in the neighborhood, and the Supreme Court judge had heard of me, and he interviewed me. And I didn't think he'd take the job. And he said, I saw something in you, Peter. And I was 12 years with Judge Thomas Polizzi, wonderful man. And I learned so much. I was so lucky. And I kept thinking I was going to leave the court system. He said, Pete, stay with me see how you like it at the end of the year. Then he said, 3 years, I'm going to go. I'll be 70 in another year, so we're going to go then. Then he got certificate. He said, I got to stay another 6 years. So he stayed then. And then he was leaving, and I went out to get jobs elsewhere, and I was picking up other stuff. And then I got a call the day after Thanksgiving from the surrogate. He said, people speak highly of you, Pete. Would you come up and be my law clerk? I said, well, let me talk to you first. So I went in and saw him, and he hired me, and he was there for a few years. And then I transitioned into the union, and I was a referee doing the trials up there. And then eventually, at the end of my 30th year, or at the end after 29 years or so, I was promoted to the supervising attorney there. And so I spent 30 years in the courthouse in Jamaica, Queens, the same one. And I had just the absolute blessing of being able to be in a courtroom and dealing with the people of Queens County every day, who I love. I love this place dearly.
So were you a law clerk for most of that time?
Principal law clerk, a referee referee in Supreme Court, as well as a principal law clerk, a referee, and a supervising attorney in the surrogates court over a 30-year career. So that I pretty much occupied all those positions. During that time, I was president of the Law Secretaries Association to the Justices of the Supreme Court in the city of New York. And I was also, after I wound up in the executive board for the Union of Court Attorneys and Referees in the city of New York, where I was on the collective bargaining committee, and I deal with OCA over the contracts and things like that. So I really wanted to make an impact to help my fellow workers and employees. But there's such terrific employees, clerks, court officers, a lot of dedication here, and a lot of it's not seen or known, the things people do and sacrifice. But there's some very good people. It's been an honor, and I'm glad to have been able to have served them in those capacities. And I was going to leave, and then I was going to leave because, frankly, I've got 2 kids going to college, and I just said, 30 years. That doesn't, it's time to change buildings, try another slice. And I was going to go into a large firm doing litigation practice, and then out of nowhere, lightning struck, and I was nominated for civil court. And then lightning struck twice when I think I came in with over 500,000 votes, first out of 8th. And now I'm sitting in Queens Civil Court, which has been a blessing. It's very nice, wonderful people here, and I love the pro se's that come in, and I do my best and my level best to to be a good judge and to give them clarity, clear opinions, and information and decisions, and move the work for the court system.
Tell me about that out of the blue call you got one day from the Estonian Embassy.
Oh, goodness, John. Oh, goodness, my heart jumped. I was sitting here at my desk in this room, and I looked over at the phone, and it just said embassy. I didn't know what that was. And I figured it was spam. Don't pick it up. And then I said, the court system, they're pretty good at screening their calls. Let me pick it up. And I said, hello? And he said, someone with an accent, Peter Lan? Lan? I said, yes. Estonian Embassy calling. It was the Justice Minister for, the Minister for, I'm sorry, the Counselor for Justice and Home Affairs. And she was telling me they had found me and they have not had, ultimately, that not an Estonian. I'm also a citizen of Estonian, you see, through their repatriation project after their revolution. They were desperately trying to find some new what happened to the diaspora and the scatterlings of Estonia. Here's my card. I'm just show up to you. And said it's the first time we've had an elected judge in the United States of America. As far as we know, let me put it that way. And because as far as I know, what do I know? I just I just do my job and keep going. And I didn't think it was that much at first, but then I started to think of my mother and to think of their struggle and to think of how closely aligned in principles they really are as a people to the United States, how very much this meant to them. And the fact that they would call was I was absolutely flattered. And so she was basically calling on behalf of the embassy staff to congratulate me. It really meant much for them. For me, I'm a bit of an embodiment of what they've aspired to do, is to further their impact and standing in the world of free democracies and the principles of freedom they believe in, and to have somebody here in the United States is they're very proud of it. It's hard for me to digest, John.
Have you been to Estonia?
Sure, yeah, beautiful. It's beautiful country. About half of it's forested. It's really a beautiful country. I'd say it's some of the cleanest air in the world, along with Iceland and some other places. You get Wi-Fi in the bus stop. The language will drive you crazy, but enough people speak English now that you'll get around. You're not going to be eating McDonald's or any franchise. These are food that's coming from the earth and from the sea. They have fish and potatoes and soups and all different type of food, which is northern Baltic, not quite Scandinavian, but very healthy and fresh food. It's I don't know. It's a nice place to visit.
Do you think your immigrant roots or your knowledge of the experience of immigrants is reflected in the way you approach your job as a judge?
Yes. Well, Queens is, as you know, this is the crossroads of the world. This is the county of immigrants. This is the county of so many people of so many backgrounds and cultures. And that's what's wonderful about it. And I feel comfortable because as we're talking too, I don't feel unique. I'm just one of 2 million stories of people here in Queens. And when people come in, there's that mutual, it affects me because I want to show the respect and understanding to the people of all of the great diversity there is here in Queens. And I know this is a working class borough, how hard many of these people work and struggle to put their kids through school and even to find a job and do things. So there's a level of empathy and a level of understanding. And they may come in with here we are, we're in America, we're in Queens, there is justice here, right? So cognizant that I'm representing that idea that's in their head, I think that the immigrant connection is really vital. And I also say this too, it's at the current time being, it's probably fairly unique. There is no Estonian Bar Association, I'm
It will be
not
fairly
backed
small,
up.
I imagine.
I'm not. It doesn't exist here. No, it doesn't. I am not backed up by a 400 or 500 member organization there to run out into the streets and do that. So to get honored by and elevated to this position by the people of Queens, for me is really extra special and something I will always think is one of the highlights of my life.
And on that note, Judge, thank you so much for your time and for your service.
John, thank you. And as they say in Estonian, aita.